Welcome back to another episode of Off the Bench, Northern Arizona Prep Sports, presented by Rice Accounting and Jackson Hewitt Tax Services and Cottonwood Parks and Recreation. I'm your host, Philip Catalfamo. We have a very exciting show for you this week. We are joined by Matt Showalter of the Bradshaw Mountain High School Bears. He is the play-by-play announcer. You can hear his voice on KKLD The Cloud every Friday night for football games for the Bears. We got a chance to sit down and talk about the 4A Grand Canyon region. We not only previewed the region, we talked a little bit about playoffs, the additions of Snowflake, what teams might surprise us out of the region this year, and how many teams might actually make the playoffs this year. A great year for the Grand Canyon region last year and an even better year for it this year, an extremely competitive season. And we break it down in just a little bit. So stick with us. We'll be joined by Matt Showalter in just a little bit right here on Off the Bench. Don't go anywhere.
Two things we can count on every year:
a new set of tax rules and great weather here in Northern Arizona.
Jackson Hewitt Tax Service, locally owned and operated by Lewis Rice since 1997, is here for you all year long.
Your neighborhood Jackson Hewitt Tax Office will help you in all of your taxing situations.
Electronic filing is always free with your tax preparation at Jackson Hewitt Tax Service.
Get more in return. Call 1-800-234-1040 for an office near you.
Welcome back to Off the Bench, Northern Arizona Prep Sports, presented by Rice Accounting and Jackson Hewitt Tax Services and Cottonwood Parks and Recreation. I'm joined now by the voice of the Bradshaw Mountain High School Bears. He is also a friend of the show, Matt Showalter. Welcome onto the program.
Hey, Philip, great to have you coming from the old bear cave, coming out of hibernation. I'm getting excited.
Yeah, it's funny. When Matt we started this call here. Matt was the lighting in his room had yet to sort of fill out, and it was a pitch black in Matt's room when we first started the call. But
and then you heard the growls.
Yeah, I heard some growls. I think I see a couple bits of salmon everywhere. But it makes a lot of sense. We are gearing up for the start of football season. We're getting very, very close to the start of the year. We did this very similar show. I said it in the intro. Did a very similar show with Nick Yatsenko and Matt Showalter last year, where we were previewing the 4A Grand Canyon region, and that is what this show is going to be, a full preview. And I figured we should start with one of the teams that I felt was the biggest surprise out of the 4A Grand Canyon region, and that is Lee Williams High School. We take a look at the last year's standings. Of course, Matt was able to celebrate a little bit with his Bears and their 4A Grand Canyon region title last year in a phenomenal football game at the end of the season, a very close battle between Prescott and Bradshaw, which led, of course, to their first round playoff matchup, which was an even more impressive game, and Prescott was able to get the revenge on their field. So two fantastic games, but Bradshaw able to capture, Coach Bob Young able to capture his first 4A Grand Canyon region title with the Bradshaw Mountain Bears. He's done it a few times, of course, with Mingus Union. But again, taking a look at the standings here, Bradshaw coming in at number 1, 7-3 overall, Prescott right behind them, Coconino High School 5-3, Lee Williams was 7-3 overall, Flagstaff 4-6, and of course, Mingus Union 2-8. I wanted to start with Lee Williams because, Matt, in my opinion, they had a great season last year, and they were one of my surprises.
Well, Lee Williams didn't surprise me last year on this show. I predicted them as a dark horse, and certainly they finished 4th in the region, but just tell you how strong the region was. 4 teams went to the playoffs, and Lee Williams was a winner in that first round, beat a very good Apache Junction team. They're going to be just as good this year. And they have a new head coach now. It's Steven Brown taking over for Patrick O'Boyle, who did a great job there, helped establish that program. Plenty of talent. What's strong about them? Again, overall talent. They have a lot of good skill position players. A lot of them are underclassmen. Also, particularly at wide receiver, if Troy Edwards stays there at receiver instead of moving to quarterback, taking Devin Santos' spot, that'll make them even more formidable. And defensively, it's where it needs to be, right up the middle. Their strengths at linebacker and DB. Now, for me, when you look at this team, they have, again, those good sophomores, Riley File and also Thomas Doxtater. And I like this new running back they'll have. Hope they'll feature him. It's called Cruz Yoakum. Love the name. And then also defensively, one of the first team DB is Devin White. So again, what's the question mark? Well, how will new head coach Steven Brown operate this team? He was the offensive coordinator, but I thought, well, he'll come back and run the same offense. No, he's going with something new. So we'll see how they adjust to it. And also the offensive line does return 2 starters, and they're pretty solid. But that's always going to be the question, particularly at 4A football. So I consider them a potential region champion, and I think definitely they'll make the playoffs.
Yeah, I think quarterback is definitely going to be one of the positions that a lot of people key in on. Obviously, Devin Santos was not only lethal with his arm, but also with his legs last season, rushing for over 1,000 yards and, of course, passing for over 1,800. A bright talent, and like you said, Matt, there's going to be some question marks there. We'll see if Troy Edwards stays at the receiver position or if he does become that jackknife player that Coach O'Boyle talked to me about last season with Troy. So, like you said, they're returning a couple pieces on the O-line. The defense looks to be returning strong. I really want to put Lee Williams up at the top, and we'll talk about them later, but I do feel that there are a couple other teams that might slot above them in terms of winning the region. But I do agree. A new head coach brings in a new potential offensive scheme. You obviously come in with a new quarterback, more than likely, or at least somebody who's a little different than Devin Santos in terms of what they offer. But I also agree. I think Lee Williams is going to be a very interesting team. They start the season off with Wickenburg, so a very winnable game. Wickenburg was 5-6 last year. So that'll be a nice start on the right foot for the new head coach for Lee Williams and potentially their new quarterback. But I've got Lee Williams right now at a strong 3. I think they potentially slot above Coconino just because they do return a lot of those skill players, and they are a very, very dynamic team on the ground and through the air. But I just have a hard time putting them above a couple other teams that we'll talk about in a little bit. But, Matt, I do agree. Lee Williams is again, going to be very, very solid. And like you said, they made the playoffs last year.
Well, I think another factor about this team is they dominated at freshman, sophomore level last year, those teams. So they have a lot of talent coming up. Again, how much does Steven Brown want to change the squad? There's always an adjustment. But this is a program that's been well established, and it's hard for me to not include them as a potential region champ, but I'm kind of leaning in your direction a little bit. We'll talk more about that later.
Well, no, and I agree. I do think that there are a lot of bright spots with Lee Williams. Like you said, they made the playoffs last year. We had talked about them. You put them in as a dark horse candidate. But I do feel that Lee Williams is going to make the playoffs again. They'll have probably a better record than they had last season, maybe 1 or 2 extra wins. But I like I said, I just feel that there might be a couple other teams above them. But I do think putting them in that dark horse category again is probably maybe the best spot to put them, just because, they're not coming in with uncertainty, but you really are curious what Coach Brown offers. You are curious what Troy Edwards offers. Troy did have some experience at quarterback last season. He was 14 for 33, 149 yards passing, no touchdowns, no interceptions, which is great, in his minimal opportunities. Of course, Troy used in other areas as receiver. He received 627 yards last season. But like I said, I just feel that there might be a couple other teams above them. One of the teams, though, unless, Matt, you had anything else to say about Lee Williams. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Well, okay, so most of Troy Edwards' passing was against Coconino the week before they faced Bradshaw Mountain because Devin Santos was out with a concussion.
Right.
So he had a solid first half, but then Coconino just started blitzing and coming hard, so they just wore them down. But again, this is a quarterback if they choose to go with him. Personally, if you have somebody better at the lower level, why not use Edwards as a receiver? But I don't know who they have behind them right now, but probably Edwards is a leader coming out of there as a quarterback. But, yeah, they're going to be a really good team, and it's looking good for the GCR if you got them down as 3 or 4.
Yeah, and I think I've got them slotted in at a really solid 3. I think Noah Petruski is his name, and he'll be a junior this season. He could be another guy who might be one of those quarterback options for Coach Brown. They've also got a kid who was a freshman last year. His last name is Feel. He might be another option as well. So guys with minimal chance, kind of minimal playing opportunities at the quarterback position.
Yeah, Rodney File's a good receiver. He's a really good receiver. He really contributed in the secondary. Their special teams also will be strong. They'll be missing their kicker, Brown, and he helped Bradshaw last year 3-0. So that could come down special teams.
Yeah. Moving on now from Lee Williams, we've got the Mingus Union Marauders. Last season we saved Mingus Union for the last, but I want to put Mingus Union here at the top of the show, mainly because, in my opinion, I think Mingus Union comes in with the biggest question marks in terms of their new head coach, their new quarterback, and a couple of their other skill positions. But Matt, I want to get your assessment first on Mingus Union. Obviously, you and I talk all the time about the Marauders. I am the play-by-play guy for them. You're the play-by-play guy for the Bears. That's not a secret. So we both got a chance to really kind of look at this team a lot last season. And I've got some things to say, but Matt, I want to get your assessment first, mainly because I think it's just going to be a lot better. So how are you feeling about Mingus Union?
Well, first of all, you're also a Bears play-by-play guy, okay? So
that's true. I was for 2 games.
Thanks for filling in for me last year when I had that COVID. Mingus, look, as you know, you called the games. Last year, they easily could have had a 5-5 record, maybe in some cases 6-4. A lot of real close games there at the end. The strength for them is the offensive line. For example, they have the 2 big kids, Isaiah Lathan and also Nicholas Schote. Makes a big difference. And they love to run the ball. They're probably going to do that probably 75-80% of the time. They have that new quarterback in Brazen Durkulik. He's had some pretty good success this summer in 7-on-7s. What I like about him is, even though he does not have a lot of experience there, he's a great athlete. He doesn't really throw a real strong ball, but he throws a very catchable ball. He's got really good timing with his receivers. By the end of the year, he could really be a big, impactful quarterback, I think, for the Mingus Marauders. Also for them, again, it's a core. They have a core of seniors. Tight end Ian Contreras, first team All-Region. He's solid as a linebacker. I like the receiver, sometimes running back, Mario Camacho. And then, of course, this guy seemed like he's been there forever, is a fullback and also linebacker, defensive lineman, Micaiah Arnado. He's also been a multiple all-region player. Then also a DB called Michael Grijalva. I like them. So they have, look, the nucleus talent. The issue about them is, what's the turnout going to be? What is the depth going to be? And can they pass effective enough? And really what they're going to do on defense.
Yeah. Well, and I think that having Isaiah Contreras come back, having some of those impact players, I agree with Grijalva. I agree with Mario Camacho as well, another sophomore corner who made some pretty big plays. But the problem with Mingus Union last season is they just lost winnable games. And you're right, Matt. I think they were in a position multiple times last season. I'm looking at their schedule here. They get a huge win against Yunker. After coming off a loss against Thunderbird to start the season. They lose 49-42 to Flagstaff, a game that, if you ask me, was, Ian Contreras, one of the Marauders stopped Bodie Meyer at the line during that game, if you ask me. So potentially Mingus Union wins that game as well. They were leading at halftime. They go and they beat Alhambra. They lose a close game to Bradshaw Mountain, again, a game that had a couple plays that go a different way. Mingus Union walks away with the win there. Arcadia was a 42-32 loss. It's only 10 points. Of course, Benjamin Franklin was a 42-0 blowout. It's tough. You didn't have Angelo Alvarez that game, so you didn't have your dynamic running back. They come back. They play Coconino extremely tough, 28-14. They lose 49-31 to Lee Williams, and then, of course, 49-21 to Prescott. But if you look at that schedule, there are at least 2 to 3 games that the Marauders could have won, which may not have put them into the playoffs, but definitely sets the program on a much more interesting trajectory coming into this season when you look at their schedule in that sort of what-if scenario where you go, look, this is a team that beat Flagstaff last season, that went toe-to-toe with Bradshaw, that went toe-to-toe with Coconino and almost beat them. I know it's a statement of what-ifs, but regardless, I mean, genuinely, this is a team that could have been a lot better than what its schedule shows. I think Brazen Durkulik adds an interesting dynamic at quarterback. You would say that he's playing well in 7-7s. I'm glad he's getting that early timing with those receivers early on. It was nice to see Zach Harrison air out the ball a little bit more last season. I think that's something that sort of handicapped Zach when Doug Provenzano was the head coach in his junior year. They let Zach air out the ball a little bit. We obviously saw the benefit of that with not only Angelo Alvarez being a running back and a receiver, but also Ian Contreras, first team All-Region, a great big receiver. I hope he gains a little speed this offseason. But regardless, he's coming back strong as a receiving option for Durkulik. You talk about a couple of the other receiving options they have. There could be an emergence of a few guys from the JV. We saw a couple guys kind of come out of nowhere and play well. Hunter Perkins was one. I know he was a senior last year, so he's gone. But they will have guys that step up. I want to know, though, if Dave Monsibias is going to be the guy to bring Mingus Union back. Dave is a former Marauder. He was with Coach Young the season before they won the state title. He's familiar with the program. He's been a teacher there for a while. This really could be potentially the transition that Yancey DeVore and the Mingus Marauder fandom has been waiting for from Bob Young, because Robert Ortiz didn't work out. Doug Provenzano didn't work out. Unfortunately, Fernando Anguiano didn't work out. And now you step in with Dave Monsiváis, and I don't want to say he's the last-ditch hope, but in a lot of ways, his success is the program's success. So hopefully Brazen slides in and can play a great quarterback, and they can, I don't know, surprise some people. Maybe they can be the Lee Williams of this year. I'm not entirely sure, but, it'll be really interesting.
Well, the freshman and sophomore team last year went 2-5, but again, they had several close games, had some really good size there. So again, there's a little bit of hope there.
Yeah.
The big thing I think for Mingus, and I've been around for 22 years now for the Bears and seen Mingus a lot, the youth football program has not been as strong as during the glory year. So that's been an issue of number turnout for them. And I think also their identity, they have established that with the running game, so kind of go back to that. And so the question is, once some teams are able to stack the box and maybe stop that running game, what are they going to do in the passing game? So it's a matter of depth and momentum and just getting the turnout for the squad. And Dave Monsiváis, I think, a positive guy, and he loves Mingus. And I think it carries a long way. Now, here's the thing, though, Philip. Mingus has not won many games over the last several years. And using that formula that AIA does, there's a chance if they don't rebound this year and win some games, they could be facing 3A.
Yep. And you now have the emergence of Snowflake, which is a team that is currently not in the 4A Grand Canyon region, but could easily slide back into the 4A Grand Canyon region next season due to their location. If Mingus Union does happen to fall out of the 4A and go into the 3A, which, as not only the voice, but also a fan of the Marauders, I would hate to see the program take a step back like that. But Matt, I mean, sometimes that's what you have to do. You have to take a step back before you can go forward. Well,
yes, and for sure. And football is really starting to get a comeback again in that Cottonwood area, Camp Verde area. And so hopefully let's see them get back on track. And if they're out of region schedule, it's not the toughest, but that's okay. Wins are wins. And so they just need a good start that'll really help them a lot.
Yeah, and then, of course, staying healthy as well, making sure the guys are on the field with grades. I mean, everything that most programs have to deal with, you always want to make sure that your guys are on track, because that's another thing. Depth was an issue with the Marauders last season when they had a couple guys go down with injuries or with outside of football issues, whatever it may be. They had trouble replacing those guys. I mean, like I said, that Benjamin Franklin game, Malik Arnuato came in and played great, but he wasn't Angelo Alvarez. Angelo added so much on the special teams and at that running back position that really he carried a lot of momentum for this team and scored a lot of points. So when he was gone, like I said, that depth struggled a little bit. And Matt, you talk about that out-of-region schedule. They'll start the season against Maryville on September 2nd. Then they'll get a chance to take on Payson. They'll then they'll be at home for Independence. They'll take on Washington following that, and then Deer Valley. And right before, they've got their first region game against Bradshaw Mountain, which, of course, is going to be a very, very tough competition this season. And of course, we'll get a chance to talk about the Bradshaw Mountain Bears with the voice of the Bradshaw Mountain Bears, Matt Showalter, here in just a little bit. But Matt, before we send it to break, anything else you want to say about Mingus Union?
Well, you just mentioned that out-of-region schedule, and I'm thinking through as you're mentioning those teams. They got a shot at 2 or 3 wins there. Again, if they stay away from injuries and so forth. So again, you're looking for at least capturing 2 or 3, and I think they get off to a good start.
And that's the hope, too. You hope they can get a couple wins, give Brazen Durkalek, the new quarterback, a little confidence. I know Brazen will be entering his senior year, so he won't be back next season. But, this season, we're very interested to see, what happens and what he does in terms of his skills on offense and how he is as a leader. I mean, it'll be interesting if they open the playbook up a little bit for Brazen, because there were a few times where we saw Zach Harrison utilized as a running back as well.
Yeah, Durkalek, to me, now, of course, Harrison, I think, is one of the better quarterbacks that's been around the GCR for a number of years, so hard to replace him. But Durkalek does add that little bit of speed and quickness. Now, last year against Bradshaw, he went out with an injury. Alvarez got slowed down because he's being used so much and was dinged up. And so once that happened, Bradshaw started to take over. So Durkalek's back. And so, Durkalek, I like him a lot.
We're going to take a break. When we come back, we will preview Coconino High School and Flagstaff with Matt Showalter on our Grand Canyon Region preview show right here on Off the Bench. Stay with us. We will be right back.
two things we can count on every year:
a new set of tax rules and great weather here in northern Arizona.
Jackson Hewitt Tax Service, locally owned and operated by Lewis Rice since 1997, is here for you all year long.
Your neighborhood Jackson Hewitt Tax Office will help you in all of your taxing situations.
Electronic filing is always free with your tax preparation at Jackson Hewitt Tax Service.
Get more in return. Call 1-800-234-1040 for an office near you.
Welcome back to Off the Bench, Northern Arizona Prep Sports, presented by Rice Accounting and Jackson Hewitt Tax Services and Cottonwood Parks and Recreation. We are continuing our Grand Canyon Region preview show here on Off the Bench. We just talked about the Lee Williams Volunteers and the Mingus Union Marauders, two teams that are very interesting this season. And now we're going to move a little bit more north and go to Flagstaff and Coconino High School. The Flagstaff Eagles, we will start with them, finished last season in 5th place in the Grand Canyon region with a 4-6 overall record. Matt, coming into this season, they replaced their senior quarterback in Bodie Meyer. So where are we at with the Flagstaff Eagles, Matt, and how are you feeling about them this season?
Well, you were right the first time. It is Bodie Meyer.
Oh, great.
And yes, you're right. And he has a little brother that most likely will be the starter. They also have a freshman who they're looking at too. So there's still a little bit of a battle there to choose and who will be their quarterback. So last year they started off great, 4-0. They even got ranked for a time in some of the PowerPoint rankings. And then, well, it went truly south then. They lost 6 in a row. The team started having a lot of injuries to key players. It exposed some of their depth problems. But their strong suit will be the wide receiver position. The question is, can they get somebody to get them the ball? Jake Weidinger is about 6'3". He'll be a senior. He's a good one.
Yep. One
of the best players in the Grand Canyon is Holden Senna. Now, he can play running back and play receiver, probably quarterback in a pinch, and he's a pretty good defender as well in the secondary. Jaden Wetzel is another good player. He'll be a junior. He's got a lot of speed. I think he can really elevate the running game because they didn't have much of one last year.
Yeah.
Their problem's going to be their size and their strength, both on the offensive and defensive line. That was, again, the issue last year. Their head coach, Sean Menning, in his second year, he'd get his program going, but he said in front of that team after that Bradshaw game and on the radio that they just got to get stronger. They're just not competing physically like with the Coconinos, the Bradshaws, and so forth. So that'll be the question for them. Can they get stronger? If they can just get a little bit of production at quarterback, that will help the Flagstaff Eagles.
Well, what helps a lot, too, is, despite the move from Bodie to potentially either his younger brother or another player, bringing back Jake Weidinger, having Wetzel, and having some of those big receiving options. They won't have Nick Morrow, who I know is a huge red zone target for them. That's 6'8", defensive lineman who also played tight end. I believe he's headed off to Cal, right?
Yeah, that's where he got his scholarship offer. Yes.
Yeah. So congrats as well to Nick for making it to the next level. We wish him nothing but the best of luck. But they're another program, Matt, where much like Mingus Union, like you said, they started off the season so well. They had 4 straight wins. They start off with Camelback. They start off with Washington. They have that close 7-point victory against Mingus Union. And then you've got Thunderbird, 4 straight wins. And like you said, just like Mingus Union, the depth, it just shows, some programs, you have years where you're deeper than usual. And unfortunately, last year were those years for Mingus Union and Flagstaff, which is why they hung around the bottom of the region. I love some of the pieces they're bringing back. You talk about Senna as a potential running back. They lost Jaramillo as a senior last season. There's kind of a big question mark who might be sliding in. They saw a little bit, obviously, from Salcido, who is now graduated. Bodie had a couple rushing yards, but it seems like Senna is going to be probably their lead back. He comes back with some good size. We'll see how he develops in his second year. But they do return some interesting pieces. But I agree. I think there might be a little too much uncertainty in it. And there are maybe some more question marks regarding their depth. And obviously the quarterback position is now a big question mark because, Bodie Meyer was a solid, consistent quarterback for Flagstaff, at least for as long as I've been here.
Yeah, I liked him. I thought he's been one of the better quarterbacks they've had in a while. But also for them, coming up from that freshman sophomore team, the last 2 to 3 years, they have not really been competitive.
Yeah.
So that's going to be an issue for them. Now, that doesn't always translate in that they can't be top-notch players at varsity.
Of course.
But but now the youth program in the Flagstaff area is very good too. Now, most are going to Coconino High School, but there's still talent there. The question is, can they get stronger? Can they continue to add to the roster? but it'll be a challenge for them this season in the Grand Canyon.
Taking a look at their schedule, they start off the year against Winslow. Then they head down to they're at home against Rio Rico. Then they take on Marcos Deniza again. They took them on a couple of years ago. And you also have Washington. That's their out-of-region schedule for the Flagstaff Eagles. And then they've got a tough starting right off the bat. They take on Prescott right after that. And then they've got Lee Williams to start their region schedule. So I'm hoping we don't see a similar sort of quick start to the season that sort of gets halted midway through for the Flagstaff Eagles, because really, I mean, coming off of those games against, Marcos Deniza and Washington, you got to take on Prescott, who is arguably one of the best teams in the region. Then you follow that up with Lee Williams, who could be the Matt even said they potentially might be a region champ this year. I mean, it's going to get tough for Flagstaff right after that out of region schedule.
The question too is, again, going back to the strength. I listened to your schedule that you mentioned. Right there in the heart of it, Marcos Deniza, who they played last year before they played Bradshaw, and they basically beat them up. It was a real physical game. Robert Ortiz, the former head coach of Mingus, is the offensive coordinator, quarterback coach at Marcos Deniza. And that team will probably maybe 10-0 this season. They're going to be that good. They're very physical. So the question is, can Flagstaff survive a little bit of a jaunt of some physical teams right there in the heart of that schedule? We'll see.
Yeah, and I guess that kind of answers the question that, you had talked about with Coach Manning at the end of the season. It's just, are they going to be able to have that strength? Are they going to be able to push back to two physical teams like Marcos Deniza? So it'll be really interesting. But, we'll talk about our full region rankings here in a little bit. But there is another Flagstaff area team that, in my opinion, will be really interesting this season. They might be the Lee Williams of this year, and that is the Coconino Panthers. I got a chance to speak with Coach Lapsley on the show not too long ago, and he shares similar excitement. They're returning a lot of strong players. They're getting a lot of senior leadership this season. And really, I think Coconino might be the Lee Williams of this year, and they will probably, again, be a playoff team.
Oh, yeah. I think that's pretty much a given.
Yeah.
Now, for them, the question will be, how can they do in the passing game? They tried some of that last year, and quite frankly, with the sophomore, tall 6'3" quarterback, Enoch Watson, I can see why they wanted to do it, because when they got into the playoffs against Cactus in the quarterfinals the previous year, they just couldn't get the ball down the field, and so Cactus has loaded up the box and beat them that way. But Cactus is Cactus. But I know they've been trying to work on that. But yeah, last year they tried. They really forced it a lot. And then against that Lee Williams in the second half, they really decided to go back to that Coco bunch, to really go to that wing tee, which really is the main offensive approach for them. It works extremely well. Teams have a hard time with that particular one.
Right.
And they've got Cooper French, who, believe it or not, could be better than Zach Bennett his senior year. That's saying a lot. He's the all-time leading rusher, Bennett is, in Coco's history. He's going to get a scholarship to wrestling to the University of Nebraska, 2 straight years state champion, probably get it for a third. Pearson Watson, a tough linebacker, about 6'2", the older brother of Enoch Watson. He's getting a scholarship to BYU. There's talent there. It's going to be defensively. Now, up front, they lost a lot of players. That's the issue for them. Offensive line, defensive line. But I tell you what, the linebackers, defensive back, Riker Patton, who'll be a junior, Jacob Klaus, a senior, they come strong, they come hard. They're a tough team. They didn't score as well last year. That'll be the question this year. Can the offensive line get going? And here's one other thing. Their defensive coordinator, Dalton Schwentz, moved on somewhere else. Now, I'll tell you, he was an unsung hero in getting that defense where it was. He used to be a head coach, is real specific and detailed in how he approached things. And we'll see, because they could miss him. But I do like Mike Lapsley as a head coach. They got talent galore coming. Their underclassmen teams were physical, strong, dominated. And youth football, they dominated again last year.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Coach Lapsley as well. I got a chance to meet him for pretty much the first time outside of just, a couple exchanging hellos during some of the Coconino Mingus games. But he's a great guy, very, very nice. And he emphasized when we were talking about hitting that weight room and keeping those guys physical, they played very well against physical teams like Marcos Deniza last season, a 49-21 win. I'll pull up their other schedule here, but just kind of taking a look at some of the teams they beat last year and even some of the games they had. You've got Cactus Shadows. They had a close victory there. That's a non-region game. You beat Marcos Deniza pretty well, 49-21. You come back, you beat Lee Williams 29-10. It was a very good team last year. Prescott, a close loss, 34-28 in overtime. They beat the Marauders. They lose a close 14-0 game against Bradshaw. Lake Havasu, 48-31. They beat Flagstaff. And then, of course, they finish out their last game of the season, which was against Glendale, a 49-26 loss. But it seems like even the Coconino Panthers, a couple more wins there. If a few things go their way, they definitely shake up the region a little bit more if they beat Prescott in that overtime game. I mean, Coconino is another team. Like I said, they're one of my top teams in the Grand Canyon region. I mean, like I said, we'll get a chance to talk about our full rankings here in just a little bit, but they bring back Enoch Watson, which is great. Like you said, tall quarterback, provides a lot through the passing game, but this offense runs through Cooper French, just like it did with Zach Bennett. And Cooper French is an absolute monster. I agree 100%. I think he could be better than Zach Bennett. The University of Nebraska is getting not only an incredible he's going on a wrestling scholarship, but if he happens to walk on the team, they're getting a great running back and they're getting a phenomenal wrestler. I got a chance to speak with his wrestling coach, Mike Schmieder, and he has nothing but high praise for Cooper. We saw Cooper pulling a couple wrestling moves when he was playing defense against the Marauders. The kid has got talent coming out of every part of his body, and he's a great football player and an even better wrestler. And like I said, this offense runs through him. 1,500 yards for Cooper French last season. He had 8 100-plus rushing games. He had 8 100-yard-plus rushing games, 17 touchdowns on the season. The next closest on the team is 3. Cooper French is solid. And I do agree. I think their defense may take a little bit of a slight hit losing their defensive coordinator. I agree. Dalton provided a lot. I mean, Coco really has always been strong defensively, and Dalton was one of those reasons. But I do think that Coco, much like a couple other teams, which we'll talk about in a little bit, are returning a lot of talent. And them and Lee Williams are really going to be battling hard to see who's going to be capturing that 3-4 spot in the region, because the last two teams we have to talk about might be battling for number 1. But, Matt, I've always had a strong feeling towards Coconino because they're just a great football team, and they've always just had talent. I mean, even watching Zach Bennett for the first 2 years I was doing broadcasting, that's turned into Cooper French. I mean, like you said, man, they got kids who are going on scholarships. There's a lot of talent on this team.
It is. But again, what are they going to try to do offensively? Are they going to try like last year where they were going to try to pass the ball? They had Ruiz at wide receiver, but he's graduated. Yep. So who's at wide receiver? We don't know yet. There are a lot of depth there at running back. And so maybe some of those running backs get some spots at wide receiver. Tight end, they lost Ortiz there last year. So again, are they going to be a passing team more, or will they just wait and pass against teams that have a hard time defending it and just go mainly with the run when they're against the better squads? I think that's the big question for them. If I were them, Watson's still learning the game a little bit. I would stick with French and pass when I need to.
Yeah, why not open up Enoch in his senior year? He's going to be a junior this year. Let him rely on Cooper French. It's Cooper's senior year. Just hand him the ball off, and if you need to open the passing games, let them have them beat the run, then go to the pass. And then next season you can flip that,
Yeah, and Watson, for example, perhaps he'll run the ball a bit more because out of that wing T, that really gives you another dimension if he can run out of that quarterback position. So we might see a little bit more of that too.
Taking a look at Coconino's schedule, they start off with Arcadia. Then they go and take on Poston Butte, who was a playoff team last year. Apache Junction, who's always tough. Northwest Christian is another team that's always tough. So I got a chance to speak with Coach Lapsley about that out-of-region schedule, and he really likes to schedule some tough competition, and it doesn't get easier for him. Right after their game against Northwest Christian, they've got Lee Williams, Mingus, Bradshaw, Prescott, and Flagstaff. So it's going to be a tough battle for Coach Lapsley, but I'll tell you what, Matt, they're going to have that strength of schedule if they beat a couple of these teams.
Oh, that's for sure. Even if they were to lose here or there because of the schedule, it helped them last year. They were supposed to play Cactus, and that got canceled because of COVID, but they had enough points in there to help them with that playoff spot. I think for them is, again, they got enough blend of experience and talent from the lower levels that they'll pick up points. Now, in the Grand Canyon region this year, your top 4 teams will also bring lots of points because if you beat them, you get all the points and half if you lose. So that's going to help all those top teams in Grand Canyon in the playoff hunt.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that as well. I mean, like I had kind of alluded, obviously I've got Prescott and Bradshaw up at the top of my region rankings, not to show my hand too early, but I mean, really, that's a great point because realistically, we are looking again at potentially 4 playoff teams, maybe 5, maybe 6. If we're lucky, potentially most of the region making into the playoffs. And I mean, like you said, Matt, if they're all coming in with winning records and you've got a Coco Prescott game, I mean, that really could decide a lot of seeding just because of how good those programs are.
Well, what I like about you is you're a hopeful guy. I listen to your broadcast. You can be down 4 touchdowns. You're thinking, hey, they got a chance to win. I love it. I don't see 6. I don't see 5, but I see 4.
Yeah. No, I of course, I got to stay optimistic, man, especially. I like
that about you, Philip.
Too many of those 40-0 games, my friend. But it's always fun. But I do agree. I think more than likely we'll get 4. I think that it's optimistic, very optimistic to think 5 or 6 with just, what we said about a couple of the programs that maybe aren't as strong as a few of the others we talked about. But
I'm sorry to interrupt here, but while I think of it, is that now last year we had 2 teams from 4A go on up into the Open 8. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's going to happen this time. No. So the fight for those back 2 playoff spots will be tougher because I don't know if there's going to be a team out of 4A this year that'll be a shoe-in for the top. I'm sorry, I don't see it probably this year because the 5A is stronger now with Cactus up there.
Yep. And
also Casa Grande went up there too. So therefore, it's going to be a little tougher for the back-end teams to make it in.
Yeah, and also, Matt, you've got the addition of Snowflake to the 4A as well, a very good 3A team that is now going to be taking that talent into the 4A. And, I mean, Matt, you could slot in Snowflake as at least a top 12 team potentially. So that already adds a lot more pressure to seeding as well because you could see our teams out of the region like Bradshaw, Prescott, or Coco fighting for those top 8, and then you slot in Snowflake, so that bumps down 1. You slot in Yuma Catholic, that slots down 1. Yeah. So the 4A itself is just becoming more competitive.
Well, because the 3A's been really good too. By the way, it's tremendous. Okay, Snowflake's on the Bradshaw schedule, but let me say this real quick about them. I thought they would be in the Grand Canyon region, but they're not. They wanted to be in the region that they're in, down around Phoenix. Mm-hmm. They have a brutal schedule. When you come up from 3A to 4A, I know if you won the state back-to-back, that's a big deal. But it's more physical. There's more players on 4A rosters. You're running across a lot of different type of offenses and defensive schemes. They're playing Cactus before they play Bradshaw. Come on, I just hope they survive. Bradshaw always has 2 or 3 injuries after that game. They play Glendale prior to that. So they're playing, I think their first game of the year is against Blue Ridge, like their rival. So you got intense games all the way down through. Plus their region is probably the toughest region in 4A. So I'll be honest with you. I don't know if they're a shoe-in for the playoffs, quite frankly.
Yeah, I think even though, despite their tough schedule, Matt, I do have a hard time not at least slotting them in the top 16, maybe even the top 17, just because of how much success they did have in the 3A. But I do agree, it's a different transition going from 3A to 4A. I mean, they're playing better teams, bigger schools. It's a little different of a dynamic, but I don't know. I maybe it's just the optimist in me, and I'm looking at a 56-0 score at halftime, and I'm going, hey, there's still hope that maybe Snowflake makes it into the playoffs.
I see your point. I mean, they got a shot. I mean, look, they're good. Bradshaw had played good against them. But the question, again, is they're going to have a new quarterback. Okay, so that quarterback last year was really good. They'll have a couple of good running backs. The question is, how will they do on the line and in the back end of that defense? So they're going to be playing a lot of teams that are going to be real physical and go deep.
Yeah, I mean, well, like we said, it's always a tough transition to go from 3A to 4A. We are continuing our 4A Grand Canyon region preview show here with Matt Showalter. When we come back, we will continue talking about Prescott and Bradshaw Mountain. And then, of course, you want to stick around for our predictions to see who is going to be walking away with a 4A Grand Canyon region title. So stay with us here on Off the Bench. We will be right back.
Two things we can count on every year.
A new set of tax rules and great weather here in northern Arizona.
Jackson Hewitt Tax Service, locally owned and operated by Lewis Rice since 1997, is here for you all year long.
Your neighborhood Jackson Hewitt tax office will help you in all of your taxing situations.
Electronic filing is always free with your tax preparation at Jackson Hewitt Tax Service.
Get more in return. Call 1-800-234-1040 for an office near you.
Welcome back to Off the Bench, Northern Arizona Prep Sports, presented by Rice Accounting and Jackson Hewitt Tax Services and Cottonwood Parks and Recreation. We are continuing our 4A Grand Canyon Region preview show right here on Off the Bench, and we are joined by the voice of the Bradshaw Mountain High School Bears. He is Matt Showalter. We talked about Mingus. We talked about Lee Williams. We talked about Coco and Flag, and there are only two more teams that we can talk about before we get into our preview, before we get into our predictions and wrap up this bad boy. Matt, they're your boys. You've been with them since the beginning. Not really, but kind of. Matt, how you? Yeah, close. Matt, how you feeling about your Bears this season?
Okay, so this team, Bob says, could be better than last year's. Now, the potential is there. Mm-hmm. Let's first talk about the question marks for the Bears. It's going to be offensive line. They lost 4 starters to graduation. And it all gets down when you're running that wing T. A big part of it is get that offensive line going. So the question is, will the Bears be able to have a serviceable enough offensive line to keep defenses honest? One, just enough time for Grady Rose to throw. Now, Grady's been seen as the potential big breakout quarterback of 4A and also Grand Canyon. He's got the tools for it. Great size, 6'2", real smart, mature, leader kind of guy. But now they switched offenses when Bob came in from the spread to the wing T, so that has affected that. But Bob knows that he has to get them going, has to get more pass completions. The Bears, if they want to really make a good run in the Grand Canyon and the playoffs, they know they got to get more than sometimes 29 yards passing a game or something like that. They got a really good receiver in 6'4" Tanner Mitchell. He didn't start playing football until 2 years ago. He's got 4.4 speed. He's outstanding. Had a real good catch against Mingus on a deep ball to help get him going. And then also they have other there, Micaiah Patentall, who was a great receiver as a sophomore, but he's really lined up as a defensive back now, and he can play the receiver position. The Bears on the skill positions, a receiver can go about 5 deep there. You got both your slot guys, you got your 2 outside guys. And then also at running back, they got Gabriel Ricketts, the sophomore last year at fullback. He's added more weight. He's running faster. He's something else. And then also they've added Malachi Stevenson can play receiver, tight end, running back. He plays defensive end. He can play linebacker. He can play free safety. Literally, he can play quarterback if they let him.
Yeah.
He is one of the most versatile, better players that I've seen at Bradshaw, and I've been there for 22 years. That's saying something. And he is a tremendous player that does not get much mention. He's outstanding. And James Giggy, a 6'4" junior, he'll be a 3-year starter on the offensive line, but where he's going to hurt you is at defensive end. He's going to come strong. So the Bears will be strong on the defensive front. Linebackers are young because they lost all those to graduation last year. The secondary is where they're really going to be strong, and they also have good depth there. So Grady Rose will have a strong year, just be a little more accurate, and the Bears offense could really be potent because they got some really good guys at sophomore. Braden Monday, electrifying running back. They got Caleb Deacons, and William Smith can run. So The Bears have more players for the team this year. A good turnout for Bob. He's had a great summer. And the freshman squad sending up players too. So this could be a special year for the Bears if the offensive line linebackers really step up.
Yeah, and you know, I agree. I think Grady Rose is probably – God, it feels like Grady's been there for 20 years because I remember talking to him about him his freshman year in 2019, and then he took over at quarterback his sophomore year, and then I believe it was his sophomore year. He was sophomore, junior year, but he was definitely effective in his junior year last season. 872 yards through the air, 6 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, obviously 260 on the ground, 5 touchdowns for him rushing. Obviously, Matt, you said it, they run the wing T, so you're not going to see very high numbers in terms of passing yards when you're in the wing T. It's a lot more of that run focused and sort of like mixing up plays and moving the line a lot. So, but I agree. I think Bradshaw, and I've alluded to it the entire show, Bradshaw and Prescott, flip a coin. They're either going to be one or two, and it's just how it's going to be. They are returning so much talent, and I think you've got another monster running back along with Cooper French in Gabriel Ricketts, and Ricketts is a year younger than him. So it's like, what is Gabriel going to do in his senior year? If you're saying that he's already bigger and faster in his junior year, I cannot imagine what he is going to offer Coach Young in his senior year next season, because the kid is an absolute monster. You talk about Malachi Stevenson. Malachi is incredibly athletic. We saw him during basketball season as well. The kid can play everywhere. He's got athleticism at every aspect. Tanner Mitchell's a big receiver. You're right. Not only was he effective against the Marauders, but he was effective in the playoff game against Prescott. He was effective in the region title game against Prescott as well. So you return Tanner Mitchell. You talk about they lose Elijah Acuna from last season, but when you've got Gabriel Ricketts now stepping fully into that running back one role, you've got another physical kid in Caden Martinez. You've got another kid, like I said, Malachi Stevenson. I mean, Matt, the running backs this season, it's going to be the year of the running back, it seems like.
It will. Caden Martinez, I'm glad you mentioned Caden. I tell you what, Philip, he is one of the best athletes in the Grand Canyon. He is tremendous. He can play outside linebacker, can play free safety. He's the backup quarterback. He wants to be a running back this year. He can also play receiver. He is clutch and outstanding. Look out for him. I really like Caden. Also, you mentioned there, Gabriel Ricketts will play linebacker, so he's going to really bring in the force there at linebacker this year. And also, Jordan Kelly stepped in after Elijah Acuna was injured last year up in the Sky Dome, and he is not the fastest, not the strongest, but he may be the smartest. He's a very efficient runner and a tough linebacker. Brother to Michael Kelly, Defensive Player of the Year, who graduated. He is going to really be a strong contributor to the Bears, and he'll be a first-team all-region linebacker.
Well, you add him along with Ricketts and, like you said, Caden Martinez. I mean, despite their question marks they may have on the defensive line, I mean, the linebackers seem to be pretty strong. And you know, like you said, adding Kelly to the rushing game as well, you kind of maybe give yourself just a little bit of a different dynamic when you go from Ricketts to him, or from a Malachi to Kelly as well. Like you said, a little slower, but a smarter runner. So it will be. We'll see how Coach Young utilizes his rushing attack this season.
Well, then Joel Dean also. I got to mention my boy Joel Dean there, the Cowboys I call him, or Primetime. I told him he's so good I gave him 2 nicknames. So he can play free safety, probably will play there this year. He was playing corner last year, and also he's a good wingback player also. So he doesn't mind going across the middle and getting those short passes. But Bob said that the best part of that defense, which was good last year, is the defensive line with the 2 ends, Malachi Stevenson and James Giggy.
Taking a look at Bradshaw's schedule this season, they'll take on Buckeye on September 16th. Then they'll take on Combs High School, Snowflake, like we talked about, the newest addition to the 4A. They'll get them in week 3 before taking on Thunderbird on the road. And then their region schedule starts with Dominguez Union Marauders and then goes Prescott, Cocoa, Flagstaff, Lee Williams. So down at the end there, Bradshaw's going to have to be battling tough with a couple of those region opponents late in the season.
Well, they will, and they start the season a week later than most. They start September 9th at Micah Mountain in Tucson.
Oh, right.
Micah Mountain is new to the 4A from last year. They're just starting their program. They're going to be way better. In fact, when people look at that Bradshaw schedule, like, I don't know about that one. This schedule is very good. Buckeye's a very good team. They were in the playoffs last year. Thunderbird almost made it. Several passing teams in there. And also, again, as they move along, but they have a pretty good home schedule, getting Lee Williams for the 4th straight year at home. You can't beat that. And Cocoa again at home. And, hey, it's always great playing in the Sky Dome when it's cold outside. I love that. And then they get Prescott at home this year. And even though Prescott has a lot of returners, I think the Bears can get them this season.
All right, Matt, let's go across the street to the Prescott High School Badgers. I know that you technically should dislike the Badgers due to the rivalry, but we both are big fans of Coach Collette and his wonderful program that has seen some great success these past 2 seasons. Obviously, Prescott was right there with Bradshaw at the top of the region. They battled in that final game of the season to see who would win the region title, and then got a chance to have that rematch in the first round of the playoffs. So just, kind of quickly here, Matt, it seems like Prescott's returning a lot of guys as well.
It is. It's the 10th year anniversary of Cody Collette's first ever win as a 4A head coach. He beat the Bradshaw Mountain Bears when I called a bus boys game, where the bus driver brought the band but forgot the football team. That's a whole nother story. True story. And they're returning 8 starters offense, 8 starters on defense. Cody Leopold, he was the player of the year in the Grand Canyon. He's a really good running back, really good linebacker, but he has a supporting cast in Cody Hanna. Also, C.N. McKelvey is a real good running back, linebacker. And certainly they have Bradshaw transfer Ruben Solano, who is a very good wide receiver, very good defensive back. He'll have to sit out the first 5 games, but he could be a key for them down the stretch. So Cody Collette, he puts that offensive line together every single year. That's always their strength. Jackson Rice, a quarterback, passed for 183 yards in that playoff game you saw and called for Bradshaw Prescott. 2 touchdowns. If they can continue that kind of stride in the passing game, look out for the Badgers.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I got a chance to speak with Coach Collette as well, like I did with Coach Lapsley a couple weeks ago. And I asked him about the quarterback position because obviously we saw Alex Vaughn for most of the regular season as their quarterback. And then, of course, Alex unfortunately got injured and Jackson Rice had to slide in, and Rice played fairly well. I remember watching him in warmups, and I was just kind of like, oh, kid seems like he can throw. We'll see how he does as the backup. And Jackson was very effective as a play caller, as a quarterback, led them to that led them to that playoff win against Bradshaw. And I talked with Coach Collette about what the quarterback situation might be. And it seems like, and you even said it, Matt, Jackson's going to be the quarterback one. And it seems like Alex may find himself in other positions. He's obviously more of a skill player. Alex was able to rack up about 93 yards on the ground last season. He's going to be a senior this year. But it seems like Coach Collette likes him a lot as a receiver. Him and Jackson have some pretty good chemistry. I'm sure there'll be instances where Vaughn is lined up at quarterback, but some great versatility in the quarterback position for Coach Collette. You talk about Cody Leopold, you can add him as well to those great running backs here in the 4A Grand Canyon region. And I think Prescott is right now in, again, flip a coin between Bradshaw and Prescott because both teams are very good this season.
If it comes down to special teams, Cole Gross, one of the best kickers in Northern Arizona, last year had a 41-yard field goal, accuracy 20 of 24 on extra points. And he was accurate 2 for 2 on field goals. And it could come down to that a lot of the games this year. So he's a benefit for them.
Taking a look at Prescott's schedule real quick before we get into our predictions. They'll take on Carl Hayden to start the season. Then they'll be on the road at Glendale. They'll take on ALA Gilbert North, which is a team Coach Collette's very excited to take on. Greenway High School, another tough team, Sierra Linda, before taking on Flagstaff, Bradshaw, Lee Williams, Cocoa, and then finishing out the season at Mingus Union, which seems to be a tradition amongst those two teams. They love getting a chance to see each other at the end of the season for some reason, but a tradition nonetheless, whether it be official or not. But Matt, much like Coconino, Prescott's got a tough out-of-region schedule as well.
They do have a tough one. It helped them last year when they beat Glendale. That's really what gave them that 8th place finish in order to host Bradshaw in the playoffs.
Yeah.
So if they can get 1 or 2 big wins out of region, once again, I'll set up really good shape.
Yeah, so we are entering the final bit of the show here, Matt. Last season, we saw the Bradshaw Mountain Bears on top of the region. I kind of kicking myself a little bit for not going back and seeing how our predictions were from last season to see who is actually correct on the final predictions. But at least for this year, Matt, I'll make sure to keep them written down for the entire year. But I want to let you, as the guest of the show, just give us who do you think, where does it shake out this year?
Okay, so I see Prescott, it's hard to say because I'm a big Bear guy, and I believe in the Bears, is number 1 this year because they returned 8 starters on both sides, offensively and defensively, and they got Cody Leopold and so many other players. And so they're poised to do something really special this year. And I think Cody Collette's one of the best coaches in Arizona high school football, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And also for Bradshaw, I'll go number 2 for Bradshaw, Bob, and the Bears, as will roll into the Cave Dominguez again this year. So Bradshaw, again, has enough starters offensively, especially on the line. They get a couple seniors in there who were reserves last year. Defensively, it should be just as good. So I'll look for Bradshaw, number 2 there. Number 3, Coconino. Okay. It was really tough for me to go with them over Lee Williams. But, again, you talk about how they've established themselves. They got such good depth there. And so because of the coaching change, if it wasn't for that, I probably would have went the other way around. Okay. Lee Williams, number 4, they could be number 1. They're really good. Number 5, look, Mingus, if they keep that core healthy, they could cause some problems for people. And then number 6, Flagstaff Eagles.
Yeah. I'll go from bottom to top on mine. Currently, I have the Mingus Union Marauders, unfortunately, at number 6, but I feel it's a close 6. Again, Marauders coming in with a new quarterback. They got a brand new head coach. Again, there are some depth questions that we have. Not saying that Mingus Union can't come out of 6 and finish in the top 3 or even better. But I think there are better teams ahead of them right now. They've got a very easy out-of-region schedule, which has helped. I mean, the Marauders had a couple of very winnable games last season, and they were able to win. They beat Alhambra, which was a blowout win, a very winnable game for the Marauders. They should win the games they'll win. And if they can play well within the region, I genuinely do think that they could find themselves in the middle of the pack, potentially fighting for that tail end of the playoffs. But there's just too many questions for me right now with the Marauders. And I hate saying that. I mean, much like you putting Prescott above Bradshaw, it's tough as the voice of the Marauders to unfortunately put them at 6. But I do have them at 6. I have Flagstaff at 5. Again, they could interchange. They got questions at quarterback, another team that's got questions in terms of depth. They lost a lot of key players on defense and offense, a lot of big targets as well. I talked about Nick Morrow. But I do think that Flagstaff edges them just a little bit in terms of the skill. I think they're just slightly deeper. And I do think that Flagstaff will figure out their quarterback problems, not to start the season, but maybe midway through, they start to piece it together a little bit. At 4, I have Coconino High School. So my middle is flipped. You've got Coco at 4. You've got Lee Williams at 4. I've got Coconino there. I love the Panthers. I do think that tough early schedule might hurt them a little bit. I love the competitive drive from Coach Lapsley. If he's listening, I love it. I really do. I think it's great to schedule tough opponents and challenge yourself before a very tough region, but I'm afraid that it might hurt them a little bit. They've got some tough games. You talk about Marcos Deniza. I mean, that's a physical team. That's a tough team to beat. Not saying they can't do it. They did it last season, but it'll be, or I'm sorry, that was Flagstaff was playing Marcos Deniza. But regardless, Coco's got a very tough playoff heavy out of region schedule. Take Marcos Deniza out of that schedule. I slot Lee Williams at 3. They are an always solid program. They're getting a new head coach this season. I believe in Troy Edwards. I believe in Noah Petrusky. Whoever they put at quarterback, I think Lee Williams always seems to find guys who really can just play well for them. Troy Edwards is a great example, a guy who was kind of a jackknife player that Coach O'Boyle was talking to me last season. Troy came in and played multiple different positions, had some success. Losing Devin Santos is tough, and it does make it a very, you could put an asterisk maybe next to the 3 for Lee Williams for me, but I strongly put them at 3. I genuinely think they'll make a bit of a turn, but in all honesty, Matt, our 1 and 2 look the exact same. I love the Bradshaw Mountain Bears. I love talking with Coach Young. But I do think that Prescott, with how many strong returners they are coming back, they are basically coming back with the same team with a few great additions from JV or from some freshmen. Coach Collette was excited about some of the freshmen. So it seems like they are going to be senior heavy. They are going to be hungry for a region title. They had it stripped away from them on their home field last season. And I think that Prescott maybe has 1 or 2 games ahead of Bradshaw to finish out the season. So it seems like, Matt, you and I are in agreement that the Prescott Badgers will probably be our Grand Canyon region champs this season.
Yeah, and watch Lee Williams will probably win. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, it's fine.
Well, you never know.
Win. I don't know.
You never know. No, I see where you're going on all of that, and it's hard to disagree with that.
Yeah. Well, Matt, I guess now the only thing we can do here is sit and wait and see what happens. But Matt, it's always great getting a chance to talk with you. I love doing these preview shows. I'm so glad we got to do another one this season. It's going to be a great year, a very competitive 4A Grand Canyon region and an even more competitive 4A. I think we are getting into the prime of 4A Grand Canyon region football. Northern Arizona football made its presence known last season. And I think this season they are going to be making some heavy noise for some of those teams down in the valley.
And it's possible you could see 2 or 3 of the Grand Canyon region teams in that top 8. Yep. In the 4A. Wouldn't it be great to get more and more of those Phoenix area teams up here where it's really cold in late November?
Yes, it is. But Matt Showalter, it is great speaking with you, sir, and thank you again for coming on.
Great to be with you, Philip, as always.
That's going to do it for this episode of Off the Bench. We are excited for the start of football season, and we will see if we are correct in our prediction that the Prescott Badgers will win the 2022-23 4A Grand Canyon region title. With that, I'm your host, Philip Catalfamo, wishing you a great rest of your day, and we will talk to you again next time.